At least, not the way he had before. The work was technically finished. The house stood repaired, solid, quiet. And yet, every room carried an echo of what had almost happened, and what, in some ways, already had. My partner noticed the changes before I said a word. Not the repairs, but me. I was distracted, quieter, too careful with my phone, too quick to agree. Guilt has a way of reshaping behavior long before it ever becomes a confession. At night, I lay awake beside someone who trusted me, replaying moments that never crossed a physical line yet felt heavier than any touch. I realized how naive I had been to believe that infidelity begins with bodies. Mine had started long before, with attention, with imagination, with the dangerous comfort of being seen. Days passed, then weeks. Life returned to its routines, but I didn't. Every time something creaked or shifted in the house, my chest tightened. Every problem that arose reminded me of him, of how easily I had leaned into someone else's strength instead of facing my own emptiness. The tool crossed my mind often, not as it was, but as what it had come to represent. Capability, temptation, the illusion that someone else could fix what I was too afraid to confront. I understood now that it was never about the tool at all. It was about my willingness to let something unfamiliar into the cracks of my life. One evening, my partner asked me if everything was okay. I almost told the truth. The words sat on my tongue, heavy and burning. But confession felt selfish, like unburdening myself at the cost of someone else's peace. So I swallowed it. I nodded. I smiled. I chose silence. That choice became my punishment. Because secrets don't disappear when they're hidden. They grow. They wait. They change the way you look at yourself in the mirror. I saw someone capable of betrayal, even without action. And that realization hurt more than guilt ever could. Sometimes, I imagine what would have happened if he had come back one more time. If the line I'd danced around had finally been crossed. Would it have been easier to define myself then? To label the moment as a mistake and move on? Instead, I was left with something far more complicated. A story with no witnesses. A betrayal with no proof. A moment that never fully happened, yet changed everything. Even now, I ask myself the question I still can't answer. Was I saved because nothing happened? Or was I already lost the moment he put his big tool in place and started fixing what I had been avoiding all along? Some things don't need to be finished to leave a mark. And this was one of them. By the time he came back again, I was no longer pretending this was just about repairs. The anticipation had settled into my body like a quiet hum, always there, always awake. I hated myself for noticing how often I checked the time that day, how carefully I chose what to wear, how quickly my mood lifted when I heard the sound at the door. That alone felt like betrayal. He stepped inside, familiar now, and the space between us felt smaller than before. The house was quieter too, as if it were listening. We exchanged polite words, but there was something underneath them, an awareness neither of us acknowledged out loud. He went back to work, and I tried to keep my distance. I told myself I would be strong this time. That I would stay in another room. That I would not watch. I failed almost immediately. Each sound drew me closer. Each pause made my heart jump. When I finally stood near him again, I felt the weight of what I was doing. Not because anyone could see, but because I could feel it. The shift had already happened. I was no longer innocent. I was choosing this. He noticed my silence and asked if I was okay. I nodded too quickly. The question lingered between us, heavier than it should have been. He didn't touch me. He didn't say anything inappropriate. And yet, the restraint itself felt charged. Like we were both standing at the edge of something we pretended not to see. When he reached for his tools again, that same familiar one among them, my chest tightened. He put his big tool in place and started, focused and controlled, unaware, or perhaps very aware, of the effect his presence had on me. I turned away, telling myself it was necessary, that I was being ridiculous. But my thoughts betrayed me. I imagined how easily lines could be crossed. How simple it would be to let the moment slip just a little further. That was when fear finally joined desire. Fear of being seen. Fear of what I was becoming. Fear of how natural this all felt. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my partner. When will you be home? The guilt hit me like a wave. Sharp, unforgiving. I realized then how far I'd already gone, not in action, but in intention. My heart was no longer where it belonged. When he finished for the day, he stood and stretched, exhaling slowly. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence was loud enough to hurt. This should hold for now, he said quietly. But sooner or later, it'll need more work. I met his eyes and understood the double meaning instantly. So will everything else, I replied, before I could stop myself. The look that passed between us then was unmistakable. Not lust, not romance, recognition. We both knew what we were risking. And we both knew we hadn't stopped it. After he left, the house felt heavier than ever. The repairs were nearly complete, but something inside me was coming undone at an alarming speed. I stood alone in the quiet, one truth echoing in my mind. I hadn't touched him, yet I had already betrayed everything. And deep down, I feared the hardest part was still ahead. After that first day, I told myself I wouldn't think about him again. People come and go, problems get fixed, life moves on. That's how it was supposed to work. Yet the house felt strangely empty once he left, as if something unfinished lingered in the air. When he returned a few days later, I felt it before I saw him. That quiet tightening in my chest. That awareness I didn't want to name. This time, I didn't pretend to be busy. He explained that the job wasn't done yet, that something deeper needed attention. I nodded, listening too closely to the sound of his voice. There was nothing inappropriate in his words, nothing bold in his behavior. And that made it worse. There was no clear line to point to, no obvious moment where I could say, this is wrong. We talked while he worked. Small things at first. The weather, the neighborhood, how long we'd both lived here. Then, almost without realizing it, the conversation shifted. He asked how long I'd been married. I answered, surprised by how easily the truth slipped out. Long enough, I said, and meant more than one thing. He didn't push. He never did. He just listened, and somehow that felt intimate. More intimate than anything physical ever could. I heard myself talking about the quiet evenings, the growing distance, the way loneliness can exist even when you're not alone. I should have stopped. I knew that. Instead, I stepped closer as he reached for that same heavy tool again. He positioned it carefully, explaining what he was about to do. I watched his hands, strong and steady, and felt a strange heat rise in my face. My thoughts betrayed me, wandering into places I had no right to go. He put his big tool in place and started working slowly, deliberately. The motion was repetitive, focused. Each movement seemed to echo in the small space between us. I became acutely aware of how close we were standing, how easily I could reach out if I wanted to. I didn't, but I thought about it. That was the moment the line shifted, not outward, but inward. Nothing visible had changed. He kept working. I kept watching. Yet something inside me had crossed into dangerous territory. I was no longer an innocent observer. I was complicit in my own longing. When my partner's name came up in conversation, I felt suggestively guilty. As if I were already hiding something, even though I hadn't touched him, hadn't said anything explicit. Emotional honesty, I realized, could be a form of betrayal all on its own. When he finally finished for the day, he wiped his hands and looked at me again. Just a second too long. I'll be back, he said. There's still more to fix. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. After he left, I walked through the house, noticing every repaired corner, every improvement he'd made. Everything looked better, stronger, and yet, something in me felt dangerously undone. That night, I lay awake again, heart racing in the dark, asking myself the same question over and over. If nothing physical has happened, why does this already feel like a secret? Ready when you are for part 3, when consequences begin to surface. I used to believe nothing could shake the life I had built. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable, predictable in the way a clock ticks faithfully on the wall, even when no one is listening. My partner and I shared a home, shared meals, shared silence. Somewhere along the way, we had stopped sharing ourselves. That was before he arrived. He came into my world disguised as something harmless, practical, necessary. Someone sent to fix a problem that had been lingering far longer than anyone wanted to admit. I remember standing back, watching him work, telling myself I was only being polite. Only being observant. Nothing more. But I noticed everything. The way he moved with confidence, like he knew exactly what he was doing. The way his voice stayed calm, even when things didn't go smoothly. He carried his tools like extensions of himself, heavy, worn, reliable. One in particular caught my attention. Bigger than the rest. Solid. Capable. I don't know why my thoughts lingered there. I told myself it was ridiculous. I was married, committed, grown enough to know better. Still, when he bent down to begin, when he put his big tool in place and started working with steady focus, something inside me shifted. Not desire, not yet. Something quieter. Curiosity mixed with a strange sense of safety. I stood closer than I needed to. The house felt different with him in it. Louder, somehow. Fuller. Each sound echoed, the scrape of metal, the low hum of effort, my own heartbeat thudding too fast for no reason at all. I caught myself holding my breath and didn't understand why. He glanced up once, just briefly. Our eyes met. Nothing happened. And yet, everything did. In that moment, I became painfully aware of how long it had been since someone looked at me without distraction. Without obligation. My partner used to look at me that way, years ago. Now, our conversations were reminders and routines. With this stranger, there were no expectations. Just presence. I offered him water. He thanked me with a small smile. Our fingers brushed as I handed him the glass. I should have stepped back then. I should have recognized the warning signs, the subtle thrill, the warmth creeping into my chest, the dangerous thought whispering, "This feels nice." Instead, I stayed. As he returned to his work, I watched again, pretending to check my phone. The tool moved with purpose, solving a problem I'd ignored for months. I wondered, briefly, what else he might be capable of fixing. The thought startled me enough to make me look away. That night, lying beside my partner, I stared at the ceiling. I told myself I was overthinking. That nothing had happened. That noticing someone didn't mean betraying someone else. Still, my mind replayed the image I couldn't shake. He put his big tool in place and started. And somehow, so did the slow unraveling of everything I thought I had under control. If you want, I can continue with part 2, crossing the line, next, keeping the same tone and pacing.